Hello, everyone. Today we are interviewing Robert Silveri, author of the new novel Beasts of the Blackstone, out now on Amazon.com. Rob, what made you want to write Beasts of the Blackstone?
Well, as you see in the introduction, I've had an obsession with Blackstone Canal for quite some time. As you know, a lot of authors are obsessed with the subject that they're writing about. So I became interested in the canal way back in college. I had uncovered a news article that said the seaport of Worcester and Worcester on the Narragansett Bay, which blew my mind. And so I started researching it. Then it was dormant for a while, and just recently I got back to it. And my main goal in this novel was to make the Blackstone Canal come alive during the years of operation, 1828 to 1848.
Great, thank you. Did you have any literary influences as you were writing the novel? I detected some magical realism.
Yeah, if you read the novel, you're going to see shades of Edgar Allan Poe, Dostoevsky in a chapter called Crime and Punishment. My friend back here, Ernest Hemingway, of course. I was always a big fan of his writing. In terms of magical realism, for my PhD, I studied extensively Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Alejo Carpentier, who are the true innovators of magical realism. Now, to me, the secret of magical realism is walking the line of believability, getting acceptance from the reader. For example, if you read about the magical yellow dust in the beginning, which could be pollen in the spring, but in the case of Beasts of the Blackstone, it's excessive, and they actually had to shovel the powder and it made people sleepy. So this is an example of walking the line of believability, because the pollen is very heavy some years. And so the reader reads it and they say, and then they continue reading. Garcia Marquez was the master of this. One of the chapters of 100 Years of Solitude begins with the line, "It rained for 4 years and 40 days. That sounds like a lot, but do you know enough about the jungle in Colombia to say that's not true? And you accept it and you continue reading. So that to me is the true magical realism that I tried to incorporate into the novel.
Awesome. What does the title Beasts of the Blackstone mean anyway?
Well, authors put a lot of thought into their titles. And of course, I loved the alliteration. But really, the true Beasts of the Blackstone are the people, are the evil mill owners, Esther and Thomas there. But I've also had an obsession with jaguars, my favorite animal, and anacondas. So I tried to work in some mythical beasts as well, again, trying to gain the reader's acceptance with historical facts, but also blending in magical realism to give it another dimension.
Thank you for explaining that. What type of research did you do while you were writing this book?
I don't even call it research because it doesn't feel like research to me. A lot of authors could probably identify with that because I love going to the canal and hiking the canal and reading books about the canal. So this was a novel from the heart that was pure pleasure for me to write. And so I've walked a good portion of the canal, taken pictures, studied it, crossed it, gone into it, and from Worcester to Providence, I go up and down the valley, I bike along the canal, I hike it, I kayak it. So I have an intimate relationship with the Blackstone Canal and the Blackstone River. And of course, researching the canal era and the Erie Canal. Um, so I don't think there's a lot of canal fiction. And I thought the Blackstone Canal deserved a great novel, and I tried to write it.
Indeed. How does the time period of this story, which you call the Canal Era, fit into the rest of American history?
Well, I was also fascinated with the canal period because it was a very brief but very tranquil part of American history. From the 1820s through the 1830s, the canal era was no more than 20 years because the railroads came along and made canals obsolete. But for their day, the canals were the superhighways of this country. And the Blackstone Canal is a 30-foot wide ditch that's 46 miles long, but it required incredible engineering to build, and it was hand built by Irish laborers. And they built it so well that you could still use it today. But when you build a canal, you need water sources. So it's connected to the river at 16 points. There's slack ponds and streams all along the way to ensure that there's enough water for the canal. However, water was always a source of conflict between the mill owners and the canal workers. And I capitalized on that real life conflict to create the mill owner characters, the canal characters who were at odds because some dry years there wasn't enough water to run the flywheels and the mills, and they were competing for the water.
Yes, that's definitely a source of conflict in Beasts of the Blackstone. Can you talk about how discrimination against Irish people fits into the story?
Yeah, I'm part Irish. Of course, everybody around this area is part Irish, so I really wanted to incorporate that theme. So it was mostly Irish immigrants who built the canal by hand. There's no machinery. They had wheelbarrows and shovels, and they were required to excavate a certain amount of earth every day. And some of the foremen actually gave them alcohol, what they call jiggers, to keep them going through the pain.
Wow.
And that was one way, Irish laborers were overworked and probably underpaid. Actually, at the ribbon cutting, when they opened the Blackstone Canal, the Irish workers who built it had to be off to the side. They didn't want them around at the ribbon cutting, even though they built it with their bare hands. They also had to live in certain areas of Worcester that were apart from the general population. So this is part of our heritage and our history. The main Irish character in the novel, Harold Cahill, actually carries my grandfather's name.
Wow. One of the most compelling characters in the novel is Molly Millworker. She's a victim of child labor. She faces poor millworking conditions. Can you talk about her situation?
Yes, I'd have to thank my sister Juliet for giving me this idea. So Beasts of the Blackstone occurs at a time when the Industrial Revolution coincided with the Blackstone Canal in the Blackstone River Valley. So I felt like it was a great time for a novel. Of course, the mills were springing up all along the river, and that led to a whole industrialization, a whole change in labor. So they were hiring some children to work in the mills. So Molly Millworker is kind of the everyman or every woman of the child mill worker. Of course, her tale is tragic. But through Molly, you can see the poor millworking conditions. You can see a patriarchal society. So Molly is actually one of the heroes of the novel. If you read carefully, she saves Captain Lawrence, even though her end is tragic. So Molly, to me, was a very important female character in the novel.
Why was it important for you to include references to the American Revolution in the story?
Well, I'm an old Revolutionary War buff at heart. I'm a very patriotic person. I live right outside of Boston, Lexington, Concord. So I got out a pen and paper and did the math. So in the 1830s, you could have an American Revolutionary War veteran if he was an older gentleman. So I created this character, Colonel Potter, who fought in Lexington and Concord, and so he could be in his 70s if he was a young man during the American Revolution. So I also thought it was important to have an elderly character in the novel, and Potter has some interesting dementia going on and flashbacks to the Revolution. So I wanted to tie that in also.
That's great. And our last question for you today is this an environmental novel?
Yes, well, this is a very interesting theme because at the end of the novel I talk about the Industrial Revolution came at a price. In 1972, the EPA declared the Blackstone River the most polluted river in the country in terms of toxic sediments. Now, what that means is sediments that are in the mud, often behind dams, that are stuck there, that can't get out. And where did those toxic sediments come from? The mills along the river, releasing chemicals and dyes into the river. Now, I personally have been part of efforts to clean up the Blackstone River, and hopefully it's cleaner than it was in 1972. But this is a cautionary tale for the whole country as the rivers began being altered because of the canal and the mills, and they were also starting to become polluted. So while the Industrial Revolution starting in the Blackstone Valley was a great thing, it also came at its cost. And it all goes back to the little Blackstone River and the Blackstone Canal between the cities of Worcester and Providence. So hopefully the future will bring further cleaning up of the Blackstone Corridor, which is a historical gem in New England, and perhaps further restoration of the canal to its former glory.
Well said. Thank you very much, Robert Silveri, author of Beasts of the Blackstone. Check it out on Amazon.com.